Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the session today. I know there were a lot of difficulty in joining this session, so thank you for your patience with and keenness to join the session. Before we begin the session today, just want to give you some housekeeping tips. So first of all, I am Pooja Trivedi. I am from Emerald Publishing, and I'm really happy to welcome all of you for the session today. You're joining the second session of the research mentoring workshop, which is conducted by the Faculty of Management Studies in collaboration with Emerald Publishing and Gulf Medical University, Ajman, UAE. I'm going to share my screen in a minute. Just give me 1 second. Right. So just in terms of the housekeeping tips today, um, you have the orange arrow that opens or closes the control panel that you have on the on the go-to panel on the screen. You can change the audio options from computer to phone through the option number 2 that is given. You can please, so all the participants are on mute. So if you have any questions, please put them in the question section. We'll try to answer those towards the end of this session. Um, at the end of the sessions, Professor Amila will be taking all the questions today. This presentation will be recorded and a certificate would be shared with all the attendees. Just because there were so many issues, let me just go over. So next time when you try to download on the events page, please select the date for the event, and you have a little go to remind me option here. So if you download this remind me option, it will download in a calendar format, so you can you will get a calendar invite. The session only shows a joining link when it is time for the session to start. So next time onwards, we'll start a session slightly earlier, so more people can join in time and have no difficulty for the session to begin on time. Right. So hopefully, some of these problems, some of these issues will be taken care in the next session when the next session happens. With that, I would like to welcome Professor Shanika to do the welcome address. Ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to the second session of Research Mentoring Workshop as an extension of the Writing Impactful Research Program and a post-conference engagement of ICMR 2021 conducted by Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka in collaboration with Emerald Publishing and Gulf Medical University, Ajman, UAE. With great respect, let me first welcome the main speaker of today's session, Professor Amila Jayarathne, a professor in marketing and a senior editor for the South Asian Journal of Marketing by Emerald. Today, she is discussing the topic, Handy Tips on Writing the Introduction of your Research. With gratitude, let me also welcome Professor Athula Nyanapala, Dean, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Then, with gratitude, let me welcome Professor Jayantha and Devasiri, the main coordinator of this workshop series, Ms. Sangeeta Menon, Publishing Relationship Manager, Emerald Publishing, Professor Sudhir Rana from Gulf Medical University, UAE. In fact, they contributed a lot in numerous ways for making this mentoring workshop a success. Then, with gratitude, let me also welcome Ms. Disha Lakkanpal, Regional Marketing Manager, Emerald Publishing Group. Then, with great respect, I would like to welcome all the distinguished participants from the Emerald Publishing, Gulf Medical University, and Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. At last, but not the least, the respected audience, mainly our academics from all the universities worldwide, senior professors, senior lecturers, students, and researchers are also welcome to the program for making the session lively. Now, I would like to introduce the main speaker of today's session, and it's a great pleasure for me to announce her. Dr. Mrs. PGS Amila Jayarathne is a professor in marketing and former head, Department of Marketing Management, Faculty of Management Studies and Commerce, University of Sri Jayewardenepura. She has published in several international conferences and in high-ranked index journals, including the International Journal of Operations and Production Management and Production Planning and Control. She is also a reviewer for several A-star journals and especially the chief editor for Asian Journal of Marketing Management and a senior editor for the South Asian Journal of Marketing by Emerald. She has been awarded by the International Journal of Operations and Production Management for an outstanding research paper and by the University of Sri Jayewardenepura for her outstanding research performances such as highest citation and highest H index of the faculty. So, dear Madam Amila Jayarathne, here onwards, the platform is yours, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shanika, for your sincere introduction. So I'm glad that I have been invited to take a part of this webinar series that's been organized by the Sabaragamuwa University in collaboration with the Emerald. So while thanking the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Athura, and main coordinator, Professor Devasiri. So let me start the assigned job for me. It's the Pooja. It's great if you can share the screen.
One moment, ma'am.
Okay, sure. Take your time, no rush.
Sorry, I think this is the wrong slide that has been shared.
That's absolutely fine that you take your time. Yeah. So if you put it to the slideshow, that's great.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So today I'll be taking you through some of the steps that we have to follow whenever we are writing an introduction section of a manuscript. I think it's we all know that this is a series of seminars. So the one has been done by Professor Sudhir. So it's about doing the literature review, and I'm also glad that we are working as team. How to do a literature review and how we get the research gaps out of the literature review. And then whenever we are writing a paper, there are certain structures. So when you are writing a paper introduction, how we write the introduction is the today's focus of this webinar. So if we go to the next slide. These are the learning outcomes that's been set for today's session. At the end of this session, you will be able to understand how to write a good introduction for your manuscript. Also, you will be able to explore some important tips, how you get the interest of the editors, reviewers, and the readers. So why it is editors, reviewers, and the readers? Because if you send a paper to a journal, the first thing, the editor should be convinced, because if the editor realizes that like this is not a paper that's suitable for my journal, then you will, unfortunately, you have to have a desk reject. So therefore, the first point that you have to take you through is the editor's gate, and then it goes to the reviewers. Then of course, you are writing the introduction first for editors, then for the reviewers. At last, but of course not least, it goes to the readers. And even for readers also, this is very important, because some readers, just by having a glance of introduction section, they can see what kind of a paper it's going to be, that manuscript. So if you go to the next slide. So those are the learning outcomes that's been set for today's session. To achieve that learning outcomes, I will be taking you through this outline. First, I will have an overview, very brief one, what's research and why we do a research and the research process. And then the main topic is coming. I will introduce the introduction section. Then I will discuss some principles of writing a good introduction for a manuscript. Then I will discuss about the models of writing introduction. After that, my focus is for elements of an introduction section. Then we'll discuss some important points that should not be missed by a researcher whenever the researcher is writing an introduction section of a manuscript. Also, I'll summarize some things that we should do and should not do while we are doing introduction section. And at last, but of course not least, I will discuss some common pitfalls that most of the researchers are making and ended up with some rejections once they send the papers to journals. And we'll discuss some of the recommendations for mitigating those pitfalls. So that is today's session outline. So we'll begin the discussion then. Next slide, please. Okay. So if I'm starting off with the research and the research process, so in the audience, of course, the well-experienced as well as young researchers are there. So if you ask a question like, what is a research? In summary, in layman language, you would say that it's a critical investigation of a particular phenomena. So either you are in the medical field, or you are in the chemistry, or the social sciences, the marketing, human resource, wherever. So it's a critical investigation of a particular phenomena. That is what we do. So then why we have to do a research? What's the ultimate purpose? So ultimate purpose is doing a knowledge contribution to the particular discipline. Suppose that if I'm doing research in the supply chain management discipline, it means that suppose that if I'm critically investigating supply network structures, so my purpose is I should add something, some new knowledge to the discipline where I'm standing on. So regardless whether I'm doing applied research or a pure research, the basic research, that is the purpose of doing a research. It's a knowledge contribution. So only thing is, like in the applied research, of course, we have application orientation where we are critically investigating an issue that's being suffered by either a company or a particular industry. But in basic research, or rather we call as pure research, that's the pure knowledge contribution, where like most of the PhD students are doing that. But suppose that, of course, in my PhD, so I have come across supply network classification taxonomy. So then for the supply network structures, that discipline, it's a completely new thing. So those things are coming under the pure research. So whatever the background, whether it's positivism or interpretivism, whatever the paradigm it's being guided, research is a systematic process. So no matter which paradigm that a researcher is standing, you have to follow these typical steps. Like you have to, of course, you have to identify the problem and you have to define it properly. So for you to do so, you have to have an approach to the problem where we do a literature review. So I think you had a very insightful session by Professor Sudhir as of the initial webinar in this webinar series. So how you get the articles, how you review those ones, and how you identify your research gap, and then how you get in a particular context. So how you just inline it with your background of the problem, and accordingly how you identify the problem and define that simultaneously happen. Then after that, we have to formulate the research design. So it's a plan like how we achieve our research objectives, and or else how we address our research question. Then of course we go for data collection, or maybe rather we call as field work. Then the data we analyze, and finally we interpret and see that what new that we have found out of the study, and of course it's been reported to a particular stakeholders. If it is applied, probably it will go for a particular company, and it will in the form of disseminating, and then it goes to the next level of publication, maybe present in a conference, and then it goes to a journal paper. Then that is the process. So next slide, please. So that is a general understanding that all the researchers are doing. And for all these steps, the webinar series has been designed by this the workshop. So today I'm talking about the introduction, and then after that, I think Professor Devasiri talking about the research design. So likewise, it's going to be a complete picture you will get to know at the end of this webinar series. Then having said that, once we have done a research, if it is a good one, so of course we have to bring that to the publishable level. So you have to publish your work. It's no point that you are doing a research and you are keeping it for yourself, especially those who are in the academia. So knowledge generation is something that we have to do as academics, so that you have to publish it among the scholars, those who are in your discipline. So it may be a conference presentation or conference paper or a journal paper, or maybe a book chapter. In different forms are there, but that should be the outcome of a result, particular research. So if we take, of course, a book chapter, the structure would be slightly different, but if it is a journal paper or a conference paper, roughly you will get to know these are the main components. Starting off with the abstract, then the keywords, that's really tracking, and the introduction where I'm with this talking in detail shortly, and then the literature review, methodology, analysis, discussion, and then the conclusion, and it gives some direction for future research, and it will end up with the references. So these are the common elements of a paper. So I'm taking the responsibility of discussing today the introduction. That is the very most important, the section of any paper. I will tell you why is that. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Before moving ahead with the introduction section, I thought of, Pooja, you can put all the bullets together. So let's have a look. Why our output? Previous slide, please. Yeah. Why our output is being rejected? Basically, these are typical reasons for being rejecting manuscript that's been submitted to journals, especially for high-ranked journals. Even other journals also the same. One thing is it doesn't fit to the journal. So you have to be very careful whenever you are selecting a journal. So if you are sending, no matter how good your paper, if you are sending it to a wrong journal, of course you ended up with a best reject. So that is very important. That's one of the reasons, common reason. Or else it does not make a theoretical contribution. So in a paper, especially in a journal paper, you have to show that you are theoretically adding something. You are making a theoretical contribution to the discipline what you are in. Or sometimes like the novelty that you are bringing, it's not something interesting. That's then again you ended up with the rejection. Or else your study design is poor. So maybe you have select the wrong study design. So you get to know these ones in detail in the next the seminar. So that means what you have done is not something what you're supposed to be, or else you may have made some mistakes in the analysis. And the other common reason is your language. You are making a lot of grammatical mistakes and some careless mistakes. And other common reason is incorrect formatting and also some issues with the references. So these are the common reasons for being rejecting manuscripts. So if you are just going through all these reasons, common reasons, I would say, except the last two, even the very last one also, it has some link. All the other are relevant to introduction section. Because in the introduction section, by reading the introduction section itself, we know that whether this manuscript matches with my journal or not. The editors can easily decide. And just by reading the introduction section itself, can have an idea about whether it's having a theoretical contribution. So what is the novelty it brings? So does that novelty strong enough for my paper to give a room for this paper? And also you can have an idea about what is the design, the research design it has been used. And even of course, just by reading the introduction section, you have an idea about the level of language. So like even the references, because we are using references in the introduction section itself. So you can have an overall idea just by reading the introduction section itself, because most of the typical reasons for being rejecting your manuscript is attached with your introduction section. So that's why when we are going to discuss the tips of writing a good introduction section, better you have to have idea about, okay, these are the reasons for rejecting the papers. Next slide, please. Okay. So if you have a paper in your hand, which would be, of course, it's an outcome of a good research. So now you have to sell your paper. To whom? The first instance, you have to sell your paper to the editors, the chief editor or the editorial board, because the editor is the one who decides whether to take that on board for the reviewing process or not. So that's why we are saying that no matter how good that research is going to be, how good that research was, if you are not in a position to sell your paper through your manuscript first to the editor, then you are failing from that point itself. And then suppose that, okay, you are able to get through from the editor's point. Now it's going to the reviewers. Even the reviewers also, you are writing for the reviewers. You are writing for the editors. Then the reviewers should be convinced, because reviewers are the subject experts. They know the subject. Then they review, they evaluate. Is this something suitable for this journal? They decide, they make their recommendations. The final decision is up to the editorial board. Of course, they are considering, they are giving a huge value for the reviewers to bring the quality of the journal to the better level. Then only it goes to the readers. So it's not that you are directly writing something for the readers. First you are writing, you have to sell your paper to the editors, then for the reviewers, and then only it goes to the readers. So therefore, in the introduction section, you have to nicely introduce your topic and the gap that you are addressing in the literature. That's a very convincing point. You have to say that, okay, suppose that if I'm talking about the sustainability in the clothing industry, so directly you have to say that, okay, this paper, it's like this. So just by reading the first couple of sentences, whoever the person reading the paper should get to know, okay, this is about this. And also you have to convince that this is an essential gap to be fulfilled. There is a gap that you have to show. This is the place where I'm contributing. So that is the role of the introduction. So you have to highlight, why am I examining this research gap? There should be a significance, there should be importance, both theoretically and managerial perspective. So you have, because I said earlier, we are doing a research for knowledge contribution, for theoretical contribution. Then the introduction section is the place where you can sell, telling that this is the knowledge what I am adding through this paper. That you have to highlight very specifically and very strongly. So that you have to highlight the empirical, theoretical, methodological, and practical implications of research. So I will discuss those ones in one of the later slides. So you have to show that this is what my contribution is from this paper. It should be very clear and precise. So then it's very easy for you to sell your paper to the stakeholders, as I said earlier, starting with the editors and then ended up with the reviewers. And also make sure that you are citing key papers from the journals. So then it gives an idea for the reader. You are referring to very good quality journal articles. So you have to refer to good journals in your discipline. Say like if you are in the supply chain management discipline, or if you are in the marketing discipline or finance discipline, in the discipline, you should know as a researcher what are the good journals. So in the paper itself, you have to refer to the articles that have been published in those journals, because that is the platform where all the scholars are coming and showcasing their real knowledge contribution. Then it gives a kind of a green light. Okay, this the authors are in line with the dialogue of the scholars in the discipline. So why not I give a room for my journal if the criterias are okay. So therefore, that's something we have, and also that is also something we can show from the introduction section itself. Of course, for you to sell your paper, the other requirement is the paper format should be in line with the journal guideline. So other than that, all the other things like introducing the topic, highlighting the gap, and discussing why it is important to address that gap, and what is the contribution am I making out of this manuscript, theoretical, empirical, methodological, and whatever the form, and also showing that I am referring to the key research papers. All these things you can address in the introduction section. So that's why this introduction section is very tricky. You have to be very sharp enough to write your introduction section in a way that can sell your paper to the target audience. I mean, first to the editors, then reviewers and the readers. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, taking a step back and imagine, now we have an idea, okay, this is what research and this is what it's happening. And output, this is how it should go to the publishable world. And these are the things that's mainly been rejecting. So we have to handle these ones. So the strong place where we have to handle that one is the introduction section. Now just imagine you are supposed to write an introduction section. Keep a step back and ask from you, where am I standing in the knowledge contribution? Because that's a key message that you have to pass to your target audience through the introduction section. What's the knowledge contribution out of this paper? Think about it. What's the impact of your research to a particular platform? So then you will scale it as empirical contribution, methodological, conceptual, and theoretical contribution. I know some of you may are very much familiar with that, but just to refresh your mind, I will tell you, there are some papers you can make empirical contribution. Something like this, where so a particular model is there, but that model has not been tested with the first-hand information. It has not been tested in any place. Then from your paper, from your study, if you have empirically tested what has already been developed by previous scholars, then you are saying that that is my contribution out of this paper. Then it's an empirical contribution. So then, though it is at a very grassroots level, but it is okay. Some journals accept it, so that you have to convince it clearly from your introduction section. And the other one is say methodological contribution. So methodological contribution, like maybe someone would do a research in the particular discipline. Mainly, most of the researchers might have used just a mono method, just one method to study a particular object. But from your study, you are bringing the novelty through the methodology that you follow. So you are saying that, no, this issue, this phenomena, what I am critically investigating, can be studied from two angles. So I can do a bit of a triangulation here. So one side I'll use secondary data to investigate a particular phenomena, and also I will investigate the same phenomena by using a different approach. I might combine it with interviews. In the finance discipline, say if it is declaring the evidence or something. So if the tradition of finance discipline of investigating that one from the secondary data, from panel data that's being collected from the stock exchange, then you are bringing the novelty. No, I'm combining it with interviews. I'm getting the behavioral side of the CEOs of public quoted companies. Then your novelty is something like a methodological contribution. Yes, there is a room for that kind of papers as well. So then you have to convince it very clearly through the introduction section. First of all, you have to decide where are you standing. Then the other one is conceptual contribution, where we sometimes through some research we can develop completely a new concept. Like this way, say the quick response, it's massively being discussed, but a researcher come across with a different concept, global quick response, something like that. So the servitization, so developing a particular concept, then it's a conceptual contribution. The other one, or the ultimate level, the highest level of contribution or novelty that you can bring from a manuscript is a theoretical contribution. So if we go to the next slide, I will discuss a little bit more on what is this theoretical contribution, so that you can have your own decision where you are standing. So let's see what's a theory. So theory, it's a fully explained set of conceptual relationships used for empirical investigations. So from a theory, we are trying to show some conceptual relationships. Then you are bringing some theory into the discipline. So of course it has some components that should have to have definitions. There should be a domain for it. And we are talking about the relationships within the theory, and we are making the predictions by using that theory. So it's worth to know that what are the guidelines for each of these components that we have to fulfill to make sure that we are making a theoretical contribution. It says in a theoretical contribution, there are definitions. It's not just renaming of existing concept. Conservation means that. So it's not like you take the same concept and you renaming, then you're saying that I'm contributing to the, no, it won't happen. It's not in that way. You have to have proper definitions if you are bringing something new. And that definition should fulfill the parsimony. So definition parsimony means it should be short definition. It's not just like taking everything and you are trying to cover up everything, then it's not going to be a good theory. The uniqueness, of course, should be there, because the parsimony definition means in one definition, you have to cover up only one concept. You should not cross over to another concept that even like going very close with the existing concept that you are dealing with. And also it should be very unique. So only one concept should be in the one definition. Then that definition is unique for that concept itself. It doesn't overlap with anything else. So that is one thing you have to fulfill if you want to make a theoretical contribution. You have to fulfill the criteria coming under definition. Then the domain. So if you are developing a theory, there should be a domain for it. It should be something generalizable. Of course, you are doing a research in a particular context. Say that I might be doing a research in the Sri Lankan context. But it's like, it doesn't mean that it is unique only for Sri Lanka. At least it should be applicable for some similar countries, like South Asian countries. So that generalizability you have to maintain. And also abstraction. It should be validated. It should be the consistently usable over a time and different places. Though it has been done in a particular time period, in a particular place, to make it a good theory, you have to maintain that domain requirement as well. Make sure that is something we can use even in other places, even in other time period, even that is in summary, that should be something generalizability. And the other one is relationship. Of course, in a theory, we are bringing new relationships. And also that relationship should be logical. There should be a logical explanation of all the concepts. That is how we maintain the internal consistency of the relationship. And the relation should also maintain the parsimony. Few relationships, not too many relationships you can't capture from one theory. So then you are not focused. So you have, if you are bringing a new theory, then make sure that the relationship that you are talking about fulfill the parsimony requirement as well. And it should be statistical parsimony. So we can use the statistics just to prove it. It is not that we are depending on statistics. Real knowledge contribution is the one where you have to focus on. And also we have to discuss about the predictions, like by using how those relationships, we should be able to predict, okay, this is what it would happen. This is what it may not happen. So you have to discuss about unlikely results as well. So if you are fulfilling these 4 criteria in terms of coming up with some new relationships, then we can say that we are making a theoretical contribution. So having said that, before writing an introduction, you have to have a clear understanding about, now you have done your study, now you are going to write your paper, and then first you ask a question from you, where am I standing in the theoretical, in the contribution that I'm making from the paper. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Okay, now let's see what is introduction. That's a platform to make the reader familiar with the background of the issue that's having in your hand. Suppose that you are talking about, you're making a theoretical contribution or empirical or conceptual or methodological contribution to something related to sustainability. So that you are investigating sustainability in the international clothing industry. You have to, by reading the introduction, the reader get familiar with the topic. And also it's a section that reflects why the issue is very important. Because there are a sea of research that's being conducted, and it's depending on the area as well. Because if we take service quality and the customer satisfaction, there the flood of research we can see. And also some novel areas also available. Introduction section is the one which gives an idea why this issue is important to investigate, why it is timely important, and why it is crucial to investigate. While giving the background information about the area that you are investigating, it has to pass a message why it is important. Otherwise, starting off with the editors, the reviewers, then you are keeping a big question to them. So what then? Don't keep that question, so what, for the mind of the editors and the reviewers. So it's a nice platform for you to communicate that, because it's pass a message. This is how I'm bringing the novelty, I'm bringing my knowledge to the discipline. Also, it's provide the flavor of the article just by reading the introduction section. Whoever the reader knows that, okay, this article is on this. So this is how being structured. So this is how the research objectives are being achieved. So it's a very strong section in any manuscript. It's like a gate of a city. Just by looking at the gate, we can imagine how the city looks like. Just by reading the introduction, the reviewers don't want to read the entire paper. And the editors, they are not anyway reading the entire paper, just the introduction. So then know that how about the quality of the remaining part? So it's like the gate. And also it's coming at the beginning. So if you are making a first impression good, so that's why I say the beginning is the half of the whole. So if your introduction is very strong and you are convincing this is the value of this paper, then the rest of the process, it's much smooth. Then an introduction is like a trailer of a movie. So if anyone wants to have an idea about a movie, just by looking at the trailer can have an idea. No need to see that who are the actors and what's going on. So likewise, same way, you don't need to read the entire paper. The people are reading only the introduction, and just by reading the introduction, they know what is this, how it has been done, and how it's been organized, what's the novelty, is it worth to keep a space for this kind of a paper in my journal or not. It's very easily we can decide. Next slide, please. Then when we are writing, so you have an idea about like what is introduction and why it is important and what we have to pass, what we have to convince through the introduction. Then let's see what are the principles that we have to follow whenever we are writing a good introduction. Of course, the main role of the introduction section is you have to sell your article. I told you at the very beginning how to sell our article. So that point also I stress the introduction section is having a major role. It's playing a major role. So here also I'm saying that introduction section is the one that sells the article first to the journal editor, then to the reviewers, and then finally it goes to the readers. So you have to always keep that in your mind whenever you are writing a good introduction. So therefore, you have to take these stakeholders. I would commonly use stakeholders word to capturing all these three the audience. You have to take them through these sections, these points. You have to show the known, the background. Say if you are writing a paper, if your research is about like sustainability practices of the clothing industry, you have to show that the clothing industry, it's been very negative to the environment. So it's making a negative contribution. So there is a very much pressure from the community or from the business model itself to being sustainable, to bring more sustainable practices. That is a known fact. It's the background information that you have to bring that to the introduction section. What is already known, what other people are discussing and why it is important. And then in the argument, in the literature, would say that, yes, we have to, there is no doubt, all the players in the clothing industry should adhere to sustainable practices. And then again, the other side, that there would be another argument saying that what kind of drivers, like maybe what capabilities brings that sustainable practices. That is not that much clear. There is a gray area. So that is a gap in the current knowledge. We know that sustainable practices people are moving, but then again, other side people says that if a company is to perform well, to bring any business model, there should be some capabilities, but still it is not clear which comparative capabilities bring which sustainable practices. Unknown area, you have to bring it. You have to take these readers through that as well. Then that means you are highlighting gaps in the current knowledge. In the introduction section itself, you must do it. Then accordingly, you have to show that, okay, in order to address that gap, I am addressing through these research questions and the research objectives. Then in the introduction section itself, okay, so probably in that example, if I have taken, so then in the research objectives, you would say that, okay, in order to address that gap, this study investigate, so to identify or explore which specific competitive capabilities brings which sustainable practices in the international clothing industry in a particular country or a region. You have to very clearly state that this is how we address that unknown thing or the research gap out of this paper. Then you have to give an idea about how you have done it, methodology that you have used. So you have to pass that message also through the introduction section. Then at last, you have to take the readers to the end. You have to conclude your introduction section by giving the structure of the paper. So in any, I'll take the example in a minute. So once I come to the basic discussions. So it says that this paper organized like this way. So the next session, like the next section like this. So likewise, it gives the how the structure of the paper. Then the reader is having a complete understanding about the entire paper. It is like a face of the paper. If the face is good, then the body is also good. So therefore, those are the very essential principles that a researcher should keep their mind whenever they are writing a good introduction. Next slide, please. So there are some models of writing introduction. The one is problem solving model. Like say from your research, if you have addressed a problem that either been suffering from a particular company or maybe a quick case study kind of thing, or else by a particular industry, then you have to highlight the problem, the context of the problem, the real problem, and this is how you have addressed it. You have found out the novel solution for it. Then the same principles that you have to follow, but you are writing it from a problem solving angle. But more common one is CARS model. So that's stand for creating a research space. So this model is the common one. And most of the cases the researchers are supposed to follow whenever they are writing the introduction section. So in this model, let's see what does it says. It says, first you have to establish a territory. You have to show the situation. Like say for an example, if someone is investigating, like a paper is about supply network structures of the clothing industry or the sustainability, whatever, you have to first establish your territory, your background, your situation. This is the situation that's talking about. Then you have to establish a niche. Niche means you have to derive the problem. Okay, we know that sustainability practices are being popularizing in this industry, but the problem is who brings with sustainability. So what kind of capabilities? So that motive these kind of sustainable practices. So that niche you have to establish within the introduction section after establishing your territory. So I will take an example after this slide, how it has been done in a good introduction. Then after highlighting that problem, now you are saying that we are in the clothing industry. In the clothing industry, the lot of supply networks are operating. So they are very dynamic, but they are very important for the global context. That is the territory you are keeping your paper. And then you are saying that since different network structures are operating, it's very difficult to know that which business models are going on. In terms of management, it's a problem. In terms of classifying these network structures, there are some models, there are some the classification that's been discussed, but they are not much matches with the international clothing industry. Then that is how you are saying you are establishing your problem. your niche. Then you have to occupy that highlighted problem, that established niche. So that means you are giving a solution. Yes, there is a gray area, the untouched area in the literature. Now you are going to address that gap from this manuscript. So you establish your research objectives, research questions. That is how you occupy that niche. Then at last, you are saying that, so we have the purpose of this paper is for this, and that is being organized in this way. So you are giving an idea about the structure. Next slide, please. So especially when establishing a niche, so that means when highlighting the research gap, so you have to state the importance of the problem. In the previous example I have taken, like the sustainability practices, you have to say that the clothing industry globally, they are negatively contributing to the environment. They are making they are releasing a lot of toxins. They are damaging environment. So that is why this industry is moving towards more sustainable practices. You see, it's highlighting the importance, and it shows the current situation globally, and if it is something relevant to a particular country, nationally. And even like in the other example, but I have taken on board. So saying that international clothing industry, lot of supply networks are operating. So it's a real, the dynamic, it's really challenging to understand. And also different types of retailers are there, starting off with the very reputed brands that's leading the international retailing clothing industry, and also very small brands, very small the department stores and likewise. So are they practicing the same network structure? So likewise, you have to bring your argument whenever you are establishing a niche, whenever you are highlighting the research gap. Show that the problem what you are studying is important. Also, you have to outline the current situation regarding the problem. This is what it's happening nowadays with the global and national data. And then you have to evaluate, because I said that the research is a critical investigation. So the situation, current situation, you have to critically review. This is what happened. Lot of network structures are there. Then, like, how are we going to classify them? Are there any classification? Yes, there are some classifications. Then again, the other side, you are saying that those classifications are not strong enough to give insights, either theoretically and practically. So likewise, you are identifying the gap. You are showing that you are establishing the niche that for you to address throughout this paper. So that you have to emphasize the importance of the proposed research, and then very important, how you address it. You have to establish the niche, you have to show the gap, and then you have to show that this is how I'm occupying that niche. So how you are going to occupy means you have to establish your research objectives and the questions. This is the strongest point you have to convince to the stakeholders. So if you are strongly convinced this, then there is a high possibility for you to get the green light from the particular journal, subject to other the fundamentals are being fulfilled. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. That model we can depict in this way. In the model, what are the areas that we have to specify? First, you have to establish the territory. Then you have to establish your niche. Then you have to occupy the niche and then show that how you achieved it. So establishing the territory means you have to give an idea about your research area. If it is in the previous example, if it is sustainability, then of sustainable practices of the clothing industry, then that is the territory that you are going to stand on. That's your research area. In the other example, I said the international clothing industry. So where it's negatively contributing to the global arena. So that sometimes like you have to be one side, you have to be sustainable, and the other side is lot of network players are there. Network structure itself is very complicated. So it's very difficult for us to study and bring any new business models to that industry. Then you are looking, then that is the research area, context, establishing territory. Then you have to establish the niche. If so, you have to highlight the gray area, untouched area. Very general to specific way. So saying that yes, different network structures are operating, different players are there, they are changing. But can we classify them? There are general classification, but those general classification may not be strong enough to understand this diverse industry. Highlight that. So that's how you are establishing the niche, establishing your research gap. There is a problem to investigate. Problem is interesting. You have to convince that through the introduction section. The problem is very interesting to study. And also say that this is something, there is something to investigate. There is a problem. Then you are occupying the niche. How we occupy the niche? By putting the research objectives in line with the research gap, so that it goes in a funnel approach. You are starting very broadly with the general understanding, giving insights about the territory, and then highlight the significance of the situation, current situation, the problem that you're investigating, and show that it's going to be what nature of contribution. So ranging from empirical to theoretical, as we discussed in one of the previous slides. And then finally, you are ending up the introduction saying that this is this is how I'm occupying that gap, because this is the research objective of the current paper. Next slide, please. So I think, okay, let's go to the next slide. I suppose it's better if you can. Okay, so let's take an example, like what does occupy the niche means. So we'll take an example paper. The Pooja, it's great if you can share that example paper that I sent you. Just minimize this one and share that.
Ma'am, unfortunately I have not been able to receive that example.
Professor Devasiri, were you able to send it?
Pooja, I just shared it. You can see it in your email.
Because that's all right for me to tell this all theory, but it's the audience feel very more closer if I show an example and how it needs to be articulated in real scenario. Pooja, I suppose you have received it now.
Ma'am, I have still not received it.
Professor Devasiri, have you sent it? Hope Professor Devasiri is in the session. Until the Pooja, you can interrupt me. So long as you received it from Professor Devasiri. So until then, I'll carry on.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, ma'am. Yes, I received it. Let me just.
Okay, then share it.
The screen now.
Okay. So if you slightly go down, Pooja, so to the introduction section, just scroll down in your screen. Yes, this one. Just keep like that. Yeah. Okay. So if I read through, you can make it a little bigger if you want.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, fine. It's absolutely fine. So the way that introduction section, in fact, this is a paper that's been done by myself and my PhD supervisor. That's it's about A-star journal. So the title goes as, if you go to the title, don't mind please. Go scroll up a little bit. Yeah, it's a supply network structures in the international clothing industry. It's a comparison of differences across retailer types. This is the example that I've been taking through whenever I'm explaining the model of writing introduction. Now, let's see whether that model has been applied in this paper. Let's go down to the introduction section now. Scroll down a little bit. Okay, just keep like that. The clothing industry presents significant supply chain challenges. You see, it's introducing the territory due to its international scope and its dynamic nature. The abolition of multi-fiber agreement in 20.
Sorry, ma'am.
Keep it. No, that's absolutely fine. I know. So then it's removing many of those barriers and bring the industry more competitive. So industry has been noted like one of the most global and mobile industries in the world. That shows that the territory you are investigating is important. So that's how you are establishing the territory. Okay. So it's not you are telling, you are getting the support from the references. Then no one can say that no. Then in the second para, it says the clothing supply networks are principally buyer-driven, and where the retailer is more powerful. Go down, scroll down a little bit, Pooja. Then in terms of structure, organization, management, so it's really changing. And also different types of retailers are operating, starting from the like very recognized brands to the value brands, like small brands. So you are introducing the context, because in this paper we are talking about network structures as well as the diversity of different retailers, and both you introduce. Okay. So that's how you establish the territory in the CARS model. Still scroll up a little bit. Okay, keep like that. Yeah, just keep like that. Then the number of, in the third paragraph, a number of generic supply network classifications. Now you're saying that different way that it's operating, and the generic supply networks classifications are there. They're already there in the literature. You are telling the current situation. However, the lack of significant detail to provide insights on the structure and the management of the different types of supply networks that have emerged in the international clothing industry. So it was not that clear, like whether those classifications that we can use in this context, it was not clear. You see, you are establishing the niche now. You are establishing the gap. You are showing the gap. Although some specific clothing supply networks have been described with these references, no classification of the clothing supply network has been presented in the literature to date. In addition, the clothing supply networks that have emerged in different types of retailers and their structure, organization, the way that they are managing have not been analyzed and compared in detail. So now here in this paper, two arguments are bringing together. One side, classifications are not strong enough for the industry, and the other side saying that the diversity of the retailers in terms of the management of the supply network, it's a gray area. That is how you establish your niche. So you show your research gap. Then you have to occupy it. Scroll down a little bit, Pooja. Yes. Then to address these gaps, this paper uses an extensive empirical study. You see, this is an empirical study. It gives a message to the audience. This is the research design. So it has empirical side to examine the type of clothing supply networks that have emerged in contemporary practices. So it seeks to develop an empirical base. So these are the research objectives then. It seeks to develop an empirical-based classification scheme for contemporary clothing supply networks to provide insights on their structures and operations, and also to examine the diversity of the supply networks across the different types of retailers. That is how you occupy the niche, by putting your research objectives very clearly and precisely. And in the other paragraph, after that, you are getting the support The desirability of investigating sector-specific networks has been highlighted frequently in the literature. Then you are showing that the literature itself is saying that these areas are yet to be investigated. Then you are getting the support saying that you are investigating something very important to investigate. And even other scholars have said that it is worth studying that area. And then at last, you are finishing a literature review by giving the structure of the paper. The paper first review relevant literatures likewise. So this has started from the general, the territory introduction. Then it has established the niche, that means highlight the gap, and then occupy the niche by showing the objectives, how it addresses it. And it shows that where your contribution is going. So that is why you are getting the support from the literature saying that these people are saying that the new knowledge is required for this discipline. And at last you are saying that, okay, this is how that's being presented. So that has used that CAST model very successfully. Go back to the slides. So normally, as a rule of thumb, we write the introduction section at last. So, and also some rule of thumbs like how lengthy the introduction, because I have seen some papers introduction it's going for pages and pages. No, it's not the background. Okay, so precisely you have to speak to those points, like 3 to 5 paragraphs. It's the normal rule of thumb, not many. And normally it says that 10 to 15% of the length of the paper should accommodate by the introduction. And also the other thing, it's that passing our mind is how many references. That of course it's depending on the industry, or sorry, the sector or area that you are investigating. Some areas it's the hell of a lot of research are being carried out, but whereas in other areas only very few research. However, as a rule of thumb, you have to bring very key important like 4 to 5 references. It's of course depending on the area. Or else, like as a rule of thumb, I would say 1/3 of the references that you are using in the entire paper should reflect in the introduction section. Then it shows that you are referring to key papers. Next slide, please. Then if I am summing up the introduction section, these are the elements that you must have in the introduction section. You should care about this research, why this research is important. You have to show the context. In the previous example, it says a global clothing industry. It's massively contributing to the world economy that has been known as a highly global and mobile industry. It shows the importance. Otherwise, you are keeping a question in the question mark to the editors and the reviewers, maybe of course for the readers. So what then? If you are simply say that I'm studying this one and this one, then people would ask, why? What's the point? So therefore, you have to establish your territory. Then what is already known about the topic? You have to show that the network structures are there, but they are not strong enough to explain this industry. That's the problem. That is the known thing. That is the background. And then you have to show that like they are not strong enough. You are highlighting the gap. You are establishing the niche. Then why it is important to learn this new information? So you have to highlight this is something very important to investigate because of these reasons. So that's why this paper is aimed at addressing that requirement. So these 5 components, elements, should have to have in your introduction. So normally I write the first draft introduction, but before submitting to a particular journal, revisit the introduction and see whether it is very powerful and strong enough to sell the paper to editors, reviewers, and finally post to the readers. So make sure these 5 elements are included in the introduction section. Next slide, please. I'll be taking you through some important points that should not be missed. Normally, in the introduction section, make sure that you are writing in a very simple sentences. Normally, we use present tense. And all the terms that you are using in the paper should be introduced in the introduction section. Of course, you can use the abbreviation later on. Otherwise, you are not covering the entire scope of your paper. So that also something you should not miss. And the references. So make sure that you are using all the key references. Excuse. So then, because I told you the editors are reading, the reviewers are reading first of all the introduction section. If you are not bringing good quality papers to the introduction section, then you can't sell your paper. You can't convince that you have done a quality work. So that your references, the strong references should be appear in the introduction section. And very precisely, you have to show that this is the aim, these are the questions and the problems that you are addressing in the paper. Excuse. Then you have to start from the general idea and you have to end up with the specific focus, specific aim, the final approach you have to use. So these are the points that you should not miss whenever you are writing an introduction section. As you can see in this diagram, how it's link abstract, introduction, and to the body of the research. Abstract, of course, you have an overall understanding about, if I'm not mistaken, you have a session for abstract as well, so that the resource person will discuss more about it. You will have an overall understanding about what is the paper, and then the introduction plays the role of filtering to the body of the knowledge. So once you read the introduction section, then you really know that what is the value, what does it, why it is being addressed, what it is being addressed, how it is being addressed. So it's like a filter. So that is the important role the introduction is playing whenever it's connecting with the other part of the paper or the manuscript. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Pooja. Okay, let me summarize what we should do and should not do whenever we are writing an introduction. If I focus on what we should do, of course, you have to state the motivation. Why this study is important. The territory, current situation, then you have to show that this is why I'm doing this. You have to show your aim of the research. And you have to refer to the relevant literature. You have to cite the key papers, at least the important ones. If you are not bringing, because if it is the known area, you can't bring all the papers, at least you have to bring the key papers to your introduction section. So you have to guide the writing of introduction from general to specific by establishing territory and then establishing the niche and occupying the niche and then say that this is how it's being addressed. You have to use the funnel approach. At the end of the introduction, state what you have achieved and how you are going to present it in the paper. In the last paragraph, normally it's accommodate. And you don't need to repeat the abstract in the introduction because abstract, it's playing a different role than the introduction. So make sure you are not crossing the border to the other section of the manuscript. And those are the things that you have to do. And let's see what are the things that you should not do. If the paper is intended for a very specific, very specialized journal, you don't need to bring simple textbooks knowledge. Say that if you are going to write a paper about the computer science, you are speaking to computer scientists. So some terminologies you can directly use. You don't need to give a general understanding on that, because in one of the previous slides I said that you have to introduce all the concepts that you are using here. But it's depending on the journal. But if you are going with the very general scope of a journal, then of course you can discuss in generally. And also when you discuss the earlier work, the previous scholars' work, it's said that we have to be critical. So we have to criticize their work to establish our niche, to show the gap. But it doesn't mean that you are totally criticizing. So you have to admit, you have to appreciate their achievement as well. In the previous example, what I shown you, we said that there are general classification of supply networks. There are already. So we are giving a credit to them. But the problem is they are not insightful to get the real picture of this industry. So first admit, and then only you show the gap by showing the vacuum in the existing knowledge. And other thing is very common mistakes, like some of the scholars, especially young scholars, would do not oversight your own paper. It's like you play your own trumpet. Sometimes you might be a person who has published a lot in that area, but we have to be careful. Like if it is, unless otherwise it's a very, very important thing and it is directly relevant, then only you bring your paper. So it's a matter of increasing the citations or some other the purposes. We should not bring unnecessarily your own papers whenever you are writing introduction. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So I'm coming to the end of the discussion today. At last, we'll discuss some of the common pitfalls that will keep our manuscript away from the journals, and also how we can handle those pitfalls. One of the pitfalls is sometimes our introduction is too general, not written to a specific readers of a design journal. It's very general. So then how we handle that pitfall? You have to be very selective. Choose a target journal and write to its readers. So that's why selection of a journal, as I said earlier, like you have to match your scope with the correct journal selection. Because if you are selecting very general journal, so then you should know that like you are speaking to a very the broader audience, like Journal of Marketing Management. It's almost all the topics are there. At the same time, you may focus on, you may have selected a very specific journal, maybe corporate social responsibility, consumer ethics, young consumers. So then you know that in the young consumers journal, you are speaking to that audience. So your introduction should match with, it should be very specific to the readers of the journal. Otherwise, it may not match us with the journal, and that is something very particularly the editors are concerned. And the citations are inadequate to support, that is other pitfall. So the recommendation is cite all the statements that could be challenged. Like I suppose you do remember in the previous example I told you, after the objectives are being established, it's we highlight the need that's been highlighted by the previous scholars. It's not, we are telling that the global industry, the clothing industry is globally important. It's because if you are openly saying it, then ask a question, who says so? So those kind of claims are subject to challenge. So you have to support with the literature. And also we said that in the paper, like the people have highlighted sectorial knowledge, sector specific network structure needs to be investigated. So if you are simply keeping that as a statement, then it has a question like, why, how do you say so? So likewise, those kind of strong claims needs to be supported by the literature. And whenever you are taking the citations, you are getting the back from the literature, you make sure that you try your level best to use open access the articles, because then anyone can see whether is that true. And other pitfall is your research aim is vague. It's not that clear. So you have to include enough key information to allow readers to imagine the analysis. Settings, in which setting it's there, and what's the context talking about, and what you are really going to do. What are the variables that's included, what's the scope, and how you did it, and which design. Everything should be in it. Then your aim is not vague. Then the author only, the other pitfall is the author only describes method for one study aim. So sometimes suppose that if your study is having the two objectives, that needs two different methods, but you are talking only about one method that goes with the one objective. So make sure if you are giving an idea about this is the method that I have used, that should be completely given. So in the paper I have taken on board as an example, that's an outcome of empirical study. So that's why it says that it's an empirical investigation. Theoretically, it's contributing something that has been empirically tested. Okay. And there is no, and the other pitfall is there is no enough or any justification for the methodology that you use or methods you use. So sometimes like since you want to do a novelty in terms of methodology, you might be combining one method with another instead of doing the mono method. But there should be a rationale. I think in one of the coming sessions, you will get to know how to select that methods in line with the research objectives. If I'm not mistaken, that's being done by Prof. So with the justification, you have to say that in the introduction section itself, like, so this is being addressed by this and this is being addressed by this. So if you have used mixed method, so there should be a rationale behind that rationale. You have to pass through the introduction section. So all in summary, I would say introduction, it is the face of the entire article. So it summarizes the where it's standing, and it gives what you have investigated, why you have investigated it, and how you have done it, and then it gives this is how your paper is being structured. So it's a very powerful section in any paper. I would say that it is worth that you read, revise, and reread, rewrite. That it's worth spending a bit of a more time while you are writing introduction and see whether those principles and models that you maintain whenever you are writing a productive and I would say a sellable introduction section in your manuscript. I suppose that's the end of the session. Next slide, please. I have included some key references I have taken on board for developing this slide. And next slide, it's the next slide, please. So at last, I would like to thank, and also I'm pretty much happy to answer any questions from the audience.
Yes, Professor Amila. Yes,
yeah.
Thank you very much for your wonderful session. We do have a few questions on board. So
yeah,
one participant asking, it is also important to mention managerial and theoretical implications in review paper. If yes, then how we can relate our review paper with such implication in the introduction section?
In a review paper, it's an interesting question, by the way. So a review paper, it's quite different from empirical paper. Like in the empirical paper, of course, we have managerial implications, but in the review paper, contribution is different. Suppose that if you are reviewing, say, for you to develop a particular review paper, the area what you are reviewing should be matured enough. Say that if it is supply chain resilience, so supply chain resilience, you may have to have at least more than 20 papers. Then you are bringing all these papers together. Then you are saying in the introduction section, you say like this has massively been discussed. So I'm now in a correct time period to synthesize all these things and see and where this area is evolving in the future. That has not been done by anybody. So that is what it's been addressed by this paper, that you have to show as the need and how you are addressing that need. And then at last you have to say that, so that the contribution that you are making out of this paper is, it gives where that discipline is currently exists and where that discipline would evolve in the future. So that is your contribution. That should be included as a theoretical implication, but the managerial implication, it is not that essential. It is not a must.
Yes, to add something to that question actually. So we should not think about, having a mixed bag of findings, conclusion, implications, everything in the introduction itself. So we see that pitfall in most of the articles we reviewed. So if you need to include some theoretical or practical implications, you can include it in the conclusion section, or else if it is a structured abstract, so there is a separate place. So introduction, keep it for the focus. So for the justification or rationalization.
Yeah, I do agree with Professor Devasiri. Yes, it's not a must, like you always bring that implications in the introduction. Yeah, if it is worth, it's okay. Otherwise, just keep it for other section.
Yes. So
but certainly for review paper, certainly for the review paper, the contribution is something different.
Yes. So second question, that is a lengthy question I can see. Ma'am, I have conducted a research 2 years before and presented in a conference. Due to some reasons, I was not able to attempt for a submission in a journal at that time. So could you please let me know, is it possible to get published such kind of a research in a good journal? If it is possible, how do I need to add any changes? I am more concerned about this since it deals with the statistics of technology and the data set of was 2019. Thank you for your consideration.
Yeah, it's one of the common thing, like sometimes we do research and then immediately we may not be, because of some commitment, we may not be able to go with the manuscript or something. Then once we come back to that our research, then the first question you have to ask from yourself, is this still a sellable question that you are addressing? Is the question is still worth for reader to know about it? So, or else, otherwise, you have to make your mind. You have to make your mind saying that no, there is no way. And also, it's of course I'm talking about the good journal, the ranked journal, index journal, high ranked journal. So, if the problem that you have investigated even 2 years back, if it is yet the current critical, I said, let me stress it. It should be something still available, current, and it should be something still critical. So if you are getting a green light for these two criteria, yes, you can have a trial. But certainly you have to update your literature. You have to read that area. So I do remember, like I had the same problem, like from one of the paper that one of my PhD, but after 2 years, I visited the paper, I had to almost rewrite because the literature has changed drastically. But still the problem has not been addressed by someone. Still the problem is current and critical. But the knowledge context has been changed. Then you have to incorporate those ones to establishing your niche. And then I don't know, like what area it is. If the analysis is more or less the usable, of course, you have to say that this is the time period I have used my data. But it's more unlikely that it will be really hard if the data is also going to be outdated. So you have to be quick in that sense. But I'm not disappointing you, but I'm telling the reality. That is the questions that you have to clarify from yourself. If there is a room, so of course you can go ahead with. Otherwise, it's a matter of revising. I hope my answer made sense.
Yes, it is exactly clear. Yes. So there is another question. Can we say the introduction is something that expanded as abstract? Does this make sense? So the attendee is asking whether it is similar to extended abstract. It is not. Madam, no. It is over to you answer.
Yeah, certainly it's not. I would say in the one of the things I said, no, don't get mixed up with an abstract. Abstract, it's extended abstract or abstract. It's totally different thing. It's play a different role. I think you have a session separately for abstract, but just to answer the question, in the abstract, you're almost giving the entire picture. Like you don't establish the territory as such. In the introduction, you have to establish your territory very strongly. But in the abstract, you are simply saying that the purpose of this paper is blah, blah, blah. That's enough. So then other difference is, that is the very, very, very critical difference. Establishing your territory and the research gap, highlighting the research gap, that won't happen in the abstract. And then your research objective, that is, it's there in the abstract also, but introduction section is the one where you are establishing it. That part is not happening in the abstract, even in the extended abstract also. And in the methodology, in the extended abstract, you give more effort. But in the introduction, you are just giving an idea. This has been addressed in this way. That's it. You don't think about, you don't compare anything like the data analysis and those parts. That part, it's included in the abstract. And you are saying the finding in the abstract, but you don't say the finding in the introduction. And the theoretical and practical implications, yes, in some journals, they are specifically asking in the abstract as subsections, what is your theoretical contribution and what's your empirical implications. But in the introduction, theoretical contribution, you have to show the way that you are establishing your territory and the niche, and then how you are occupying it. But it's not the way that it's happening in the abstract. So it's totally two different things, even though it is extended abstract. Extended abstract, it's more or less like the body version of the paper.
Yes, mini version of the paper. 100% agree with you. Yes. So the next question: how can we bring novelty through methodology? We have discussed it, but you can answer.
Yeah, I think I'm crossing the border to your area that you'll be discussing in the future, the session, the methodology, the research design. Yes, to address to this question, easily I would say that in your discipline, if a particular phenomena has been investigated, say the brand preference, since my discipline is marketing, say brand preference has been investigated mainly in the form of survey. But now you want to couple it with you want to get more rigor, you want to get more quality to the findings. So you are bringing it, that is subjective observations. Survey means subjectively you are getting the perceptual evaluation. So now you want to get the objective data, maybe from the big data analysis, or maybe from some mechanical observations. So you put some mechanical instrument in a supermarket and capture the data. So you are combining, not just one method, you are combining with another method. Or else I think Professor Devasiri has done a good publication with the triangulation. So where the evidence declaration decision. So that's massively been investigated in terms of the data available in the stock market. But since I also take part of that project, you have nicely done it, like looking at only the data that's been available, the stock exchange, it's just one side of the picture. So you have combined it with the other side, you have bring the behavioral side of it, like interviewing the CEOs. If I'm not mistaken, if I'm mistaken, so you can correct me. So then it's a novelty that you are bringing from the methodology, because you are using mixed method, qualitative one side and quantitative another side. That is one example of methodological contribution. I think if you search the Professor Devasiri's Google profile, you'll be able to get to know that paper. Anything from you?
Thank you very much. So we will be discussing this topic next week. So could you please give a few more examples for empirical contribution?
It's very easy, I can make it. Say for an example, if the audience is there in the marketing discipline, there is a very particular, the common model called Savakol model for the service quality. So the Parasuraman developed the model. Suppose that the model is there, but no one has yet tested it. You take the model and testing it in your context, empirical contribution. Or else the technical acceptance model. Someone saying that this is how people accept the technology. But it is from the theory it's building up. Normally theoretical contribution comes first. And then somebody else take that model and test it. Maybe testing in Sri Lanka, testing in India or Pakistan. and saying that this model works this way in India, but it doesn't work the same way in Sri Lanka. So that is the knowledge contribution. So you are getting the empirical contribution that is contextual to a particular country. So because there are socio-cultural and economical, political diversity that brings the novelty to the knowledge. So that's why we can't take the same thing as it is that's been the developed by the developed countries. Some models that's massively been, a lot of scholars are based in developed countries. So new knowledge is coming over there, but we can't take them as it is for the Asian context. So taking those models and adapting to the Asian context, empirical contribution.
Thank you very much for your wonderful answer. So the next question, I received a comment from a reviewer saying that in a qualitative study, you should not mention the theory that is used in the study, since the theory is identified after data is analyzed. Is that true? If so, how can I mention the theoretical contribution in the introduction section?
It's a very interesting question. Yeah, it's good that I'm doing research both the qualitative and quantitative side. Yes. Yes, in the qualitative research, you start with a blank mind. You are interpreters. So you are part of the research. You are interpreting from your own way. There are certain instances where we can use the theory, but it's contextual. So especially if you are going with the grounded theory, you explore something that's relevant to a particular ground. So then you are saying that, okay, say, even the paper that I have taken on board, that example, supply network structures, that is the qualitative paper. So qualitatively, without any predeterminations, we have explored new supply network structures. It's totally new. That become a theory. So how it became a theory? First, you have to bring that to the scholars, and you have to argue that this is how we have taken it through. So they have to accept it in a leading conferences, and then it has to go to the journals where the scholars are working in that area. Then coming back to your other question, if that is the case, how am I arguing the theoretical contribution if there is no theory? Theoretical contribution does not mean that there should be a theory in advance. So because that means you are having like positivist mindset. So you have to change that mindset. It is not something compulsory. Even you can take this paper as an example. I'm not referring to any previous models. It's totally, completely new. Still, it's published in a A-star journal. Theoretical contribution does not necessarily be you are giving the relationships, but not the relationship backed by the particular model. Here also in this paper also talking about the relationship like different network structures for different retailers. So it's one of the criteria in a good theory, as I shown in that slide. So it's not a must.
So the next question, there is an interesting question. Ma'am, can we claim to make a theoretical contribution if we just take one constituent of the theory, just empirically explaining the relationship between two constructs, not covering the other parts? So meaning that taking only two variables or three variables, not taking the entire theory. So can we make a theoretical contribution, Caesar?
I would say no. Yeah. Because yeah, it's there, like in a theory, in whatever the theory, you have to maintain the parsimony. But parsimony does not mean that you have to limit your variables to just one or three. So it means that you are parsimony. Its main idea behind is you are capturing the essence. Unnecessarily, you are not bringing, because just to make your model more complicated, you can bring unnecessary variables. That shouldn't be. That it's a one extreme. But the other extreme is to make it more parsimony. You are limiting, like you are taking off some essential the relationship, that is also should not be. So the best thing is refer to quality the papers in good journals, and if they are arguing that these things should be investigated together, bring them and investigate together. So there should be always rationale and argument for you to include and exclude anything to your model.
We will take another 3 to 4 questions. So is there a word limit for the introduction section? We discussed this matter. So Professor Amila
Yeah.
stated 10 to 15% maximum of the total word count. So you can go for 3 to 4 paragraphs maximum, one and a half pages. So not more than that, because this is not a history lesson. This is the introduction section. So am I correct?
So yeah, it's very much like it should be very short and very strong introduction section.
So what important things should be considered while writing introduction of systematic literature review? How to justify the gap in SLR paper?
Very challenging.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting, because systematic literature, I think I don't know whether the Professor Sudhir is also in the session because he's the expert for that. So there are in the systematic literature review, it's a review paper. So the first of all, for you to do a systematic literature review, to make sure that the area is matured enough. So you have to establish the territory. So this is the area that I'm investigating. If I'm taking the previous example, supply chain resilience, you have to show that this resilience has been discussed many the years in different disciplines by different people. So then you have to show that this is now we are in the time period to review it and bring that all knowledge into a one platform. So then that is why you are doing, then you show the need, establishing the niche that I model in the CAST model. And then you are saying that even though it is essential to bring all these, the diverse knowledge that's been discussed by different scholars in the different the areas, still no one has done it. So that is why you are doing the systematic literature. That is why you are doing a review. So for doing a review, the methodology that you are using is a systematic literature review, because that's the most accepted. So that is how you are arguing in a literature, and also you have to show the vision. So what's the purpose of doing this one? Because the purpose now, this area has already enough been evolved. So it's a time for me to review and summarize, and also foresee where does it go. So then the person who is reading that one knows that, okay, if I read this article, if I accept this article for my journal, so many people will read this article, then my journal will have a good impact factor, because a lot of citations will come, because the publishing a review paper is really challenging. But once you have done it, so it's a flood of citations, because many people are referring to review papers. So that's how you have to stand on your own feet whenever you are going for a review paper. By the way, it's all the best. I know that it's really challenging.
Yes. Is there Professor Sudhir? Are you there? If you are available, you can comment. So if not, we'll take the next question. So there is another question. So how can I mention the theoretical contribution in the introduction section?
So you are not mentioning like my theoretical contribution is like this. No, it's you have to convince your theoretical contribution. You have to follow that model, establish the territory, establish the niche, and show that how you are occupying the niche. So if you are nicely going through your argument across these three elements, it convinces this is the theoretical contribution. In the paper that it's taken on board here, say that this industry is important, the area is important, then say that currently the network structures are not strong enough to explain this industry, showing the gap. And then saying that, so this paper has done a completely new supply network classification. That's the theoretical contribution. It is not just the matter of wordings, it is the way that you are arguing.
Exactly, 100%. So the next question, that is interesting question. What are the differences between thesis introduction and a research paper introduction?
Yes, in a thesis introduction, you have enough room. So you can you are being pampered with a lot of words, and also you have to give a lot of weight for the background. So you are writing the chapters like pages and pages for the background, but in that's the common mistake. Like some people just take the same thing what you have written, take copy and paste for the introduction in the paper, that at the first point that we as editors reject it.
Yes.
You have to rewrite. So in the introduction in a paper, you have to introduce in the context. If you take this example, just 2 sentences, just a 1 paragraph, but that 2 sentences, couple of sentences, that to the point it's saying that this is the background. But for the thesis, you may have written like even 5-6 pages to give the introduction to the background. So likewise, in a thesis introduction, it's you have a more word and you have more room to explain everything. But in a paper, of course, it's limited in terms of words. But even though it's limited in terms of words, you can't compromise the quality. So writing introduction in a journal paper, it's very challenging because you have to incorporate everything within very like 3 to 5 paragraphs. But to the point, you have to sell your paper.
So thank you very much for that question. We'll take another question, another question. So I guess the trailer of a movie metaphor is a bit contradictory to what you emphasize throughout. Yes. Trailer of a movie always keeps the best part of the movie unraveled or reserve the curiosity to watch the movie, but I guess in the introduction you need to reveal your best findings or the apex of work. Just a thought.
No, it's like this. So you put it in another way. In the trailer, yes, what's the purpose of giving a trailer? For people to give the curiosity. So this is the movie it's about. So it gives the picture. And take the introduction, what I have taken as an example in the paper that I published in a A-star journal. So I didn't say a single word about the finding. So it gives the curiosity. So this paper is about this. But if you want to get the real story, if you want to know what is the movie about, so the secret, you should read the paper, unless otherwise you won't explore. It's exactly the trail of the movie.
So to add something to that question, actually, if you consider about a trailer, it is similar to the abstract of your product. Final product is your manuscript. So the advertisement of your manuscript is the abstract. So it is something like a trailer where you can convince the reader at the first place, so you are getting the interest. So it is the advertisement, not the introduction.
Yeah. So because in the introduction, normally that is also another important point, like this question induced me to stress it. You don't need to bring the findings in the introduction. Nowhere in the throughout you listen to my session, in a single place I didn't mention that you have to bring the findings. So that's how it's different from the abstract.
That is, madam, one of the major pitfalls we see in most of the introductions, where there is a mixed bags of findings, discussion, everything is there in the introduction. That's why we thought to conduct this session even during this 8-week series, in order to discuss the do's and don'ts in each and every section.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that wonderful question. With that note, actually, so the time is exactly around 2:28. So with that, we can wind up the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your wonderful answers. So now it is the time for the vote of thanks. So today, I take it as a great pleasure and privilege in order to deliver the vote of thanks on the second session of the Research Mentoring Program 2022. I, on behalf of the Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, Emerald Publishing, and also Gulf Medical University, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the main speaker today, Professor Amila Jayarathne, Senior Editor of the South Asian Journal of Marketing, published by Emerald, and a professor from the Department of Marketing, University of Sri Jayewardenepura. So I consider it as indeed an insightful and informational session that covered the ways and means of writing the introduction of your research. So it has given some tips in writing the introduction. In addition to that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the resource panel who supported us in making this program a great success. At the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the Emerald Publishing, Faculty of Management Studies, at the Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka and also the Gulf Medical University for their unconditional support in conducting this session. In particular, I wish to express my gratitude to Mr. Sundar Radhakrishnan, Vice President, South Asia Emerald Publishing, Professor Atula Jnanapala, Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies, Professor M.S.M. Aslam, Chairman of the Research and Publication Unit of the Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. I would also like to express my sense of obligations for the organizing committee for their kind guidance for the entire event and also helping in us in strengthening in various mechanisms. In particular, the support rendered by Mr. Sangeeta Menon, Publishing Relationship Manager, Emerald Publishing, Professor Sudhir Rana, who is one of the major contributor of this program, is an associate professor at the Gulf Medical University, and Ms. Disa Lakanpal, Regional Marketing Manager at Emerald Publishing. And today we do have Pooja Trivedi. So thank you very much for the support rendered in making this session a great success. Then, with a great respect, I would like to thank to all the distinguished officials from Emerald Publishing, Gulf Medical University, and Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Last,
thank you so much, everyone, and lovely audience, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, we were waiting for you, Professor Sudhir, when we were discussing about systematic literature review. You were not there. Thank you.
I'm
coming
so
in
sorry
again.
No. Like once the one question asked, I said that the expert is Professor Sudhir. It's not me to answer that question, but it's okay. I answered it. So it's a nice companion, Professor Sudhir.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the audience, all the professors, senior academics, visiting faculty, researchers, industry participants, research students, media presenters, including Sunday Observer, for their active participation. Thank you all again. We plan to meet up again on next Thursday, 15th September at 12:30 p.m. IST, and we are going to discuss the ways and means of writing the methodology section of your manuscript. Have a great week ahead. Great. So that with that, we are going to conclude the second session. And considering the fact that there were some issues in joining, so we will be sharing a guide on how to join.
Hi, the next. Good morning. I'm well. How are you doing?
So the Pooja, thank you very much for the helping hand with me. So, and thank you very much, Professor Devasiri, and to the entire team. So I hope it makes sense.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, wish you all the best for all future endeavors.